Let's start this bulletin with some breaking news that's come to us in the last half hour from the US State Department in Washington. It has said it's now completely confident that Israel will agree on a ceasefire deal. The US President Joe Biden's proposal would end the fighting between the two sides and return Israeli hostages, beginning with a 6-week ceasefire. And in addition to that, we've also learned in the last half hour from the Israeli military that 4 more hostages taken by Hamas, the proscribed terrorist organisation in Gaza, are dead, and the circumstances are now being investigated. We'll try and get you more detail on that, of course, as we get it. Now, the other main news today is, of course, that Nigel Farage has said that he will stand as Reform UK parliamentary candidate for Clacton in Essex in the general election in July. He was speaking at a news conference in London this afternoon to confirm his change of heart. Mr Farage also announcing he'll take over as leader of Reform UK. Take a listen.
So I am going to stand in this election. I'll be launching my candidacy at midday tomorrow in the Essex seaside town of Clacton. So midday tomorrow, Clacton, at the end of the pier.
And Camilla Tominey talking to Nigel Farage after this news bulletin. Now, Rishi Sunak has denied he's stoking a culture war with his pledge to amend the Equality Act. The Prime Minister wants to make clear sex means biological sex rather than gender, and says the current confusion over the legal definition cannot be allowed to continue. The proposals would allow organisations to bar men who identify as women from single-sex spaces, including hospital wards and sports events. Labour has labelled the policy an election distraction, the Lib Dems saying there's no need to unpick the Act. And First Minister of Scotland, the leader of the SNP, John Swinney, has said the Conservatives' plans to change the Act are a deliberate attempt to undermine the Scottish Parliament. Sir Keir Starmer said today that Labour is totally committed to the security of the nation, and he said to the UK's nuclear deterrent. He described the Trident programme as a fundamental, vital part of our defence. Labour is pledging to build 4 new nuclear submarines and increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP when, he says, economic conditions are right. The Conservatives are saying they'll meet that target by 2030, but Sir Keir dismissed concerns that his shadow Foreign Secretary and Deputy Party leader voted against the UK having a nuclear weapon just 8 years ago. He's criticised instead the Tories for what he called politicising the issue. And lastly, the Liberal Democrats are vowing to tackle water pollution as part of their election manifesto. They've announced plans for a new protected blue flag status for rivers, with legally binding targets to prevent sewage dumping and special protection for swimmers and wildlife. It would include the expansion of marine protected areas to cover at least 50% of the UK's territorial waters by 2030. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Polly, and welcome back. Now, before we speak to Nigel Farage about his big announcement, we're going to just have a look at the reaction from the opposition. So, before he made that announcement this afternoon, Rishi Sunak was asked about Nigel Farage potentially standing.
At the end of the day, on July 5th, one of 2 people will be Prime Minister, either Keir Starmer or me. A vote for anyone who's not a Conservative candidate is just a vote to put Keir Starmer in number 10. So if you're someone who cares about tackling migration, both the boats and legal migration, if you're someone who wants a more proportionate, pragmatic approach to net zero that saves people money, and if you're someone who wants lower taxes, it's only the Conservatives that are going to offer all those things, and that's the choice at this election. Lower taxes with the Conservatives, a plan to stop the boats, legal migration coming down, and a sensible way to get to net zero that saves people money. That's what we offer. Keir Starmer doesn't believe in any of those things, and that's a choice that people should consider.
Meanwhile, Labour appear to be unfazed by the news. They have said that their message to voters remains unchanged. Here is what Nick Thomas-Simons, the Shadow Minister without portfolio, had to say to GB News earlier.
Our message to voters is unchanged. It's the message I've been out delivering on the doorsteps today, in recent days, recent weeks and months, and that is that if you want genuine change, real change away from the chaos of the Conservatives and their failure over the last 14 years, the only way to do that is to vote Labour. It is a choice at this election between a changed Labour Party under Keir Starmer and 5 more years of chaos, instability and failure under the Conservatives.
Well, Nigel Farage, the newfound leader of Reform and parliamentary candidate for Clacton, joins me now in the studio. Good to see you. Busy day for you, I'm sure. Look, I've had a lot of Reform briefings in this afternoon as we've covered this story for The Telegraph, saying this was always the plan. This was always the plan. He changed it at the last minute, but now he's reverted back to plan A. So if it was always the plan, why have you prevaricated and mucked about with this?
Because the election was called early. You know, I'd planned to do this. The election was called early. I was pretty... I have to say, I sort of had my legs kicked out from under me on it. I thought it was impossible, literally impossible, to fight a parliamentary seat from scratch and campaign all around the country. So I said, you know what, I'll campaign around the country. And I spent last week I was busy, you know, press conferences in Dover, the delights of BBC's Question Time with Piers Morgan, I mean, what a thrill. Then I was out on the streets for the last few days. And 2 things happened. One, I began to see a new phenomenon out there. There is a hunger.
It can't be the first time you've seen that, though. I mean, something significant must have changed.
Very significant, yes. I've never seen
new data?
No, we haven't got any data. We've got 0 data.
I just can't understand how you've gone from...
I've been doing
I haven't
this for
had
30
time
years.
for this. I can't do this in the time frame.
No,
we haven't got the data or the funding to actually know I'm doing it.
No, there is a buzz out there. There is something happening, particularly among young people. That I found very interesting. But the thing that really got me was the number of people saying, but why are you not standing? And they look at you and you give a response and they look at you as if to say, you've let me down. I began to feel guilty about it. And that people's army that I'd built up in the UKIP days, the referendum days, millions of people who'd been with me for a long, long time were feeling that I was letting them down. And that feeling of guilt made me think, you know what, I can't just leave them on their own.
How much of an influence has Trump's conviction last week had on your decision-making? So what, are you just dumping the whole America project now?
No.
What are you going to do then? How are you going to... Because you said you didn't have time to campaign nationally and locally.
No, what I said was...
now you're saying you've got time to be leader
I said,
and a candidate for Clacton and campaign for Trump in some way.
Well, you didn't read the thing I put out. I said I would do my bit in the general election campaign and then spend more time in America. Clearly...
Well, how does that help the constituents of Clacton?
Well, clearly, if I'm elected for Clacton, I will not be able to spend the amount of time in America that I previously would, but I still will. So it's all about proportion.
Isn't it that you have figured, in the absence of Boris Johnson, you've taken soundings over the weekend, you've enjoyed being among the public. I've seen some of your socials, having selfies taken and all that you actually now see yourself as Britain's Trump, that you can position yourself as being extremely prominent.
I'd never thought of that. I'd never thought of that in my life.
Really?
And you know why? Some things cross the Atlantic, others don't.
OK, so it's now going to be beholden on you to put some substance behind your soundbites. So let's just talk about the policy that you said was the most important for reform of this election, and that's immigration. Richard Tice, the former leader of Reform, now has said that he thinks we should have net zero immigration. How on earth is that going to work in practice?
Do you know, you're right, Richard said that. But at least he's not lying. I just saw a clip on the news of Rishi Sunak that confirmed what I'd done today was right. If you want lower taxes, vote Conservative. Really? You want lower immigration, vote Conservative. Really?
Yes.
You want to stop the boats, vote Conservative. Really? All they're doing is lying to the public.
I know, but you need to answer my straight questions with straight answers because you get annoyed yourself with politicians prevaricating.
We have to get...
Net zero immigration, that's just a pipe dream, isn't it? It's just...
Why?
It's ludicrous.
Why?
Because you and I know, because you're an intelligent man, that you can't have net zero immigration.
Yes,
because
you can.
Unfortunately, we do need, as far as you're concerned, migrant workers in this country.
How many people left the UK last year?
You tell me.
600,000.
Right.
So you could actually have net zero migration on current numbers.
Including in healthcare and in social care?
Well, if I tell you something, if we need more than 600,000 people a year, we're doomed. Doomed, we're finished, there will be no public services, nothing will be left.
But are you serious?
The fabric of society will be gone.
You're serious that the healthcare and social care sector could cope with net zero immigration?
Could they
Who would you get to fill the vacancies?
Could they cope with 600,000 migrants a year?
But could you answer my question?
600,000 people a year would still come in under current numbers on net zero migration. It's a lot of people, you know. So a lot of people, we've had this addiction to cheap foreign labour, unskilled labour, and the bigger the company, the more reliant on it they are.
OK, very briefly.
And it doesn't work for anybody.
You're expecting the poll numbers to shift. Do you expect to overtake the Tories, and if so, by when?
Well, obviously we can't tell, but I think two things will happen. I think, one, the Conservatives will realise even without me they were doomed. It was interesting, there was a big MRP poll on Sky News out at 5 o'clock, putting the Tories way down. So everyone knows. Can you
beat the Tories in the polling, and when will you do that by?
So everyone knows that the election's over in terms of who wins. But I think what will happen, this is my guess, is that from here we will take equally from the Conservatives, from Labour, and also from non-voters.
Will you beat them, and when will you beat them by?
Well, I have no idea. Have you?
Well, have you got an ambition to beat them?
Ah, that's different. Do I have an ambition?
So when would you hope to have an impact on Reform's polling
within a week,
that you overtake the...
I would hope within a week we're going to be equal with the Conservatives and maybe ahead.
OK, all right.
And I think that's possible.
OK.
And it's possible because... And it won't just be Tories switching, it'll be Labour too.
All right, we need to move on, but thank you very much, Nigel Farage, for joining me this evening on Vote 2024. Obviously, we've changed the name of the show because Nigel will not be able to continue with his GB News show in light of recent events. I think it's fair to say that. Now, let's speak to Adam Cherry now. He's GB News' reporter, and he's been in Clacton all day to gauge reaction to this news. Adam.
Yeah, good evening, Camilla. I'm standing in front of the Clacton Pier where Nigel will launch his campaign tomorrow. As you say, I've been trying to get a feel for what the local people think. And I would say the overwhelming impression is one of disillusionment with politics in general. I think the first thing to say in terms of the other candidates here is that Giles Watling is the Conservative candidate, and he won here in 2019 on 70% of the vote. He had an enormous majority in 2019, and he won pretty comfortably in 2017 as well. However, the spanner in the works here is what happened before that. So in 2015, in the general election, and in 2014, there was a by-election here, and that was won by Douglas Carswell, who was the one and only UKIP MP. He won here very comfortably in both of those contests. And in the 2016 referendum, this place voted 70% for Leave. And you can feel it when you're here, as you talk to people, that the promises over Brexit and particularly over the 2019 Conservative manifesto, there's a feeling that those weren't delivered on. So Giles Watling has said today already that he's happy to show Nigel around the constituency, but he won't sacrifice his constituency on the altar, quote, of Nigel's vanity, of Nigel Farage's vanity. So he knows he's got a serious fight on his hands here. There's also the Labour candidate, who is Jovan Owosu Nepal. He is a local trade unionist, a young trade unionist, and he was selected about a month ago. He says his main campaign priorities are on social housing and social justice. Now, Labour would have, this probably would not have been natural terrain for Labour in this election, but they would have hoped to chip away at that enormous Conservative majority had this announcement not come through. But it's certainly true, in my experience talking to people here today, that Giles Watling will have a serious fight on his hands.
All right, Adam Cherry, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that update from Clacton, where all of the action is happening this evening. Now, as I've said, Nigel Farage will stand for Reform UK in Clacton, but here's a list of the people who have declared their candidacy in the constituency so far. As Adam's mentioned there, Jovan Owosu Nepal will be standing for the Labour Party. Natasha Osben will be standing for the Greens. Giles Watling is the Conservative Party candidate. Matthew Bensalem is the Liberal Democrat candidate. And as I said, Nigel Farage is there for Reform UK. Just to say, we did invite all of the other candidates onto this show this evening, but none of them got back to us in terms of appearing. But we will, of course, continue to invite all of the candidates of that constituency onto GB News as the election campaign continues. Don't forget that we publish all of the candidates' lists when we refer to them on the GB News website once it's finalised. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to GB News political editor Chris Hope about everything that's been going on the campaign trail today, and we're also going to have a look at the latest polling, which looks admittedly absolutely dire for the Conservatives. Don't go anywhere.
weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is about the Biden administration kind of resisting calls from Harry's lawyers whether or not this ongoing thing about releasing his visa records over the alleged, in Spare, he admitted to taking, remember his memoir Spare? He admitted to taking cocaine, marijuana and magic mushrooms. And a lot of people are saying, was he honest and truthful in his application, in his visa application? You have to say, have you taken drugs? He said no, and then in Spare he said yes. So I think this is absolutely fascinating. They're saying they can't release these records because there is a stigma attached to law enforcement records. Yes, there's a stigma attached to that, but then don't say... everybody else, if you write yes on a visa application, you will be chucked out of the United States. You will be denied entry. So I think this is fascinating that on this issue of whether there is a stigma for Harry or not, he can have his law enforcement records not released into the public domain.
The bottom line is, do we want him back?
So what's interesting is it seems to be becoming a political dividing line in the States because Biden is the administration trying to do Harry a favour by keeping them under wraps, but Trump has promised that he will, the file will be made public if he wins again.
Trump's been very strong on this. He said, if Harry lied, then he's out.
The one thing about America is their politicians make ours look sane. Which is saying something.
I'm slightly confused about this whole story because, OK, sure, Prince Harry has said this. How many pop stars, rock stars, movie stars, like every
the difference is, well, I don't think it's just British. I think millions of Brits, to be fair to them, lie on the form every year. Millions of people from around the world lie on the form every year. Not, of course,
I'm not going to name any pop star specifically, but I would be mightily surprised if any hadn't indulged in what...
Yes, but of course they haven't given written evidence in their biography that they have, and that's the difference.
Britain's election channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Okwir, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Vote 2024 with me, Camilla Tominey, loving that new graphic. Can you imagine how quickly things have had to change at GB News in the last few hours? So we praise the people in charge of graphics, producers, managers and everyone else. Now, joining me now is Christopher Hope, GB News' political reporter, editor.
Yes.
Oh, come on.
Don't demote me already.
I'm sorry, they've been so busy doing the graphics that they've demoted you. And pollster Matt Goodwin, lovely to see you. Professor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt Goodwin.
Let's get the titles right.
Gents, we'll get into this, pretty sharpish, frankly, because it's been quite the afternoon. Initial reactions to this decision, Chris, first of all.
Just wow, but I can trace back all happening. He made an offer on Harry Cole's Sun TV programme saying, what's your offer from the Tory party? The following day, that's Thursday, he said, no, that was banter. It wasn't banter. Listen back. He's saying, what he got from me, nothing happened. Yeah. Friday happens.
No deal, basically.
No deal. He campaigned in Ashfield. He went to the Ship Inn in Wandsworth, I know. He got mobbed by people. And there's young men, young people, young families wanting selfies. Sunday, he says he wants to hollow out the Tory party.
Yes.
Monday, he declares. There's a clear line of thinking happening there, and he's been saying repeatedly on air, I really regret not standing.
Yeah, he realised he made a cataclysmic error because, as I put to him in a previous interview, Matt, I basically said, this is a contradiction because on one hand you're saying Britain's going to hell in a handcart and then you're saying, but actually I'm not going to help out, I'm going to go to America. And I felt he squandered his sort of man of the people credentials by saying, well, no, I'm going to become man of Trump.
I think that initial statement was phrased very poorly, but I don't think this is about the events of the last week. This is about the events of the last 10 years. What we've seen today is the beginning of a battle for the future of British conservatism. It is a battle, in a way, for the future of the British right. And this has been coming not just since Rishi Sunak announced the election. Let me tell you, this has been coming since the rise of the UK Independence Party, since the vote for Brexit, since the Brexit Party, since the start of reform, over and over again, millions of voters have been saying, I want lower immigration, I want secure borders, I want an economy that puts British people ahead of everybody else. And the Tories, to be blunt, over the last 14 years, haven't given people what they promised. And what they have done is they've created today. They've created Nigel Farage announcing he's now going to go hell for leather to replace the Conservative Party.
Look, I felt that this afternoon was very reminiscent of the Brexit campaign. I feel that he's trying to make a direct appeal, particularly to the Red Wall. This was about cross-generational, cross-ideological, cross-class, actually, saying, if you agree with me that Britain is broken, then come with me and I'll give you back your country, OK? Now, that's all well and good. But, Chris, where does Rishi Sunak pivot to as a result of this?
Okay.
There'll be plenty of people who are like, no, I don't like Nigel Farage. I'm a righty, but no, Reform and Nigel Farage appall me. It's all about dog whistle politics. He's blaming everything on immigration and immigrants. So I don't like him. They may then fall into line with Sunak as moderate right. He can't outright Nigel Farage.
Have you seen The Blue Planet with David Attenborough?
Go on.
You know when they have these bait balls in the sea, and then they get attacked from tuna, and it ends up by a little sort of a husk and a bit of a fish eye, and that's about all that's left. That is the Tory party right now. They're being attacked from left and right, from obviously the main opposition problem, which is Keir Starmer's Labour Party, but also the Reform Party is getting its teeth stuck in. And I'm not sure Mr Sunak knows what he's doing or where to go. And this is entirely of his own making. You have to. It's not as though he's forced into an election. He wasn't meant to have this until November.
This is all on the basis that you can only win an election from the right and not from the centre. You know, the Cameron-Osborne argument is you don't need to go full Farage. You've got to be broad church because you've got to unite two different constituencies. Tories that love Nigel Farage and Tories that hate him.
So, yeah, but I think we need to stop talking as though we're still in the 2000s and the 2010s. We're in a new politics. We are approaching what many people can feel, without being too dramatic, but they can feel this is almost a civilizational moment in the sense that they don't quite understand what it is that makes we in Britain a we anymore. They're being bombarded by mass migration. The borders are out of control. We've got sectarianism that we saw in the local elections. We have debates about radical Islam and its compatibility with British society, which no mainstream politician wants to have. We've got young Gen Z Zoomers who cannot get on the housing ladder. We've got a debate in this election which is saying nothing about what's our long-term growth strategy, how are we reviving productivity. I don't personally think Nigel Farage has the answers to all of those questions, but he is at least asking those questions, and that is why he's going to cause enormous damage. The one thing I'd add to Chris's point, which was great, there's another thing attacking the Tories: apathy. Remember 97? Many Conservatives, they didn't defect, they just stayed at home.
All right. Well, let's just move away from the big bombshell announcement and just talk generally about the campaigning picture so far.
Yes.
This MRP poll suggesting that Labour will win 422 seats. That's 194 more than Blair in 1997.
Yes.
And the Tories will be reduced to 140 seats, the worst result for them since 1906. In fact, I think even worse than 1906.
Yeah. Lib Dems on 48. That's an uptick of around, trebling theirs.
Should we believe these numbers?
Reform, 0.
Yes.
Now, that might change with Farage. Farage claiming he's going to beat...
This, sort of apocalypse for the Conservatives.
It's 60,000 people that they've surveyed here. It's not even the 10,000 in which we featured on Friday night on GB News. This is 60,000 people surveyed. It's a big number.
Can I just briefly say about the MRP? Yeah. We are either heading towards the political equivalent of the Titanic, the Conservatives being essentially blown off the map. Some of the viewers will remember 1997 when Anthony King, he looked at the numbers coming in and he said, this is like an asteroid hitting planet Earth and destroying everything on it. That was a new Labour landslide. That's what the Conservative Party is facing. It's either that, Camilla, or the polling industry is about to experience the biggest error in its entire history, and it might as well pack up shop and go home.
So
it's going to be one of the two.
It's
going to be one of the two. Now, we've had the by-elections, remember. The by-elections have shown us that these Labour swings are real and they're historic. So maybe, just maybe, we are actually going to see something truly historic here.
Well, on Labour swings, I mean, I find it astonishing, and he gave his big talk today about defence, we're going to be covering this a little bit later on, that actually Labour are now only 2 points behind the Conservatives when it comes to defence and security. It's like they're trusted more with the economy, they're trusted more with defence and security, they're trusted more with keeping taxes down.
With Brexit.
Has the world started turning in the opposite direction?
They're just trusted more. I think they're just trusted more. I mean, I think people have turned off from all the messaging coming out from the Tory party. That's a problem. Everything he's tried since he became leader hasn't worked. Essentially, what happened is clever clogs MPs felt they'd given up with Boris Johnson and tried to replace him with two people. It didn't work out.
But, Chris, the one thing I would come back to is it's not that Labour are leading in the polls against the Conservatives. Yes, they are. But if you look at the detail in the polling, as we've done, we've had GB News polling this week, often the person who's ahead is actually none of them, none of the above. And this takes us back to Nigel Farage, because on immigration, on Brexit, on the economy, it's not that people are saying Keir Starmer and Labour have the answers. They're often saying none of them have the answers.
But Farage's answers aren't great either. Your question's on net zero. He didn't like that at all. I mean, to be fair, he's had a big weekend of Nights to the Soul.
Hang on a minute.
Nigel Farage did not have answers for you at all on net zero.
He's a great campaigner. No. We're now going to find out if he's actually got something to add to these. This rhetoric is all well and good.
He wasn't ready for the detailed questions. I mean, let's give the guy maybe a slight break that he's worked out what he's doing in the past. But he had no answers there, and that's his problem.
He's got to work that out pretty damn quickly. Matt, just quickly, your own polling. Some interesting findings, not just on politics, actually. Just tell us about that D-Day finding. We've got this is remarkable. About D-Day.
This is remarkable. It did actually come up in the speech today that we saw with Nigel Farage. He referenced an earlier poll, but we found much the same today. Not even half of the country can actually say what D-Day refers to. There's a real ignorance out there in the country about what D-Day is all about, and I think, you know, I don't want to make this. I don't want to make this political. We're not the first people to find this. YouGov have found it as well. The one thing I would say is this is going to press that button out there in the country, that button of concern about actually what are we teaching kids? How aware of our national history are we? And actually, we talk a lot about what's wrong with Britain. We talk a lot about what's wrong with British Empire and the history and the legacy of our country. But do we actually teach kids enough about what we got right, about what we did right? And I think that's where this polling comes into play.
Matt, Chris, brilliant analysis from you two. Thank you very much. And don't worry, because if you watch GB News, you can find out about D-Day, because we're going to be covering it on this show a little later. We're also going to be covering the idea that Labour, surprise, surprise, might want to have closer alignment with the EU. Brace yourselves. Stay tuned for that.
Hello again. Very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Whilst it is going to stay dry for many of us as we go through the rest of today, we can expect some wet weather pushing its way in as we go into tomorrow. That's in association with a feature currently out in the Atlantic, and it's heading its way towards the UK. For the time being, though, we are going to have a lot of dry weather as we go through the rest of this evening and overnight. Some places will see some clear skies developing, but many areas sticking with largely cloudy skies. And then rain pushing its way in initially across parts of Northern Ireland, but reaching far western parts of Scotland, England and Wales later on. Because of the largely cloudy skies, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, but some places under the clear skies could just about drop into single figures. If we take a closer look at what will be happening first thing tomorrow morning, and it's a generally fine picture across many southern southeastern parts. Yes, a bit of cloud across East Anglia, but on the whole a dry story here. Different picture further north and west though. Rain across Northern Ireland, northwest England, parts of Wales, and also a large chunk of Scotland as well, waking up to a pretty wet start as that wet weather pushes its way in. Eastern Scotland may be clinging on to some fine weather for a little bit longer, but across far northern parts of Scotland, here there will be some hefty showers around, and some of these could turn pretty heavy, possibly even thundery as we go through the day. The rain is gradually going to make its way southeastwards, but southeastern parts of the country likely to stay pretty dry by the time the system arrives here. It will have broken up so much that I'm only expecting 1 or 2 spots of rain, if anything. And in the southeast, temperatures still on the warm side, highs of around 22-23 Celsius, but something markedly fresher towards the northwest behind the front. As we look into Wednesday, it is going to be a showery day, particularly towards the north and west. That's where the showers are coming from. Some of them could be heavy, possibly even thundery, maybe even a little bit of snow over the highest ground of Scotland. But further south, it's looking dry and brighter. A similar picture on Thursday, but I think by Friday, the showers are going to be a bit more widespread. Bye-bye.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians and the media, but it's actually about you. We won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear all sides
as you make your decision in the run-up to polling day.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's election channel. Welcome back to Vote 2024 with me, Camilla Tominey. Lovely to have your company this evening. Now, the Tories today have proposed a trans ban in single-sex spaces. This is what Kemi Badenoch, the Women and Equalities Minister, told GB News about the policy earlier.
The problem we're solving is for many organisations like rape crisis centres, prisons, for instance, where people may identify as a woman even though they're biologically male and they don't know what to do. And we are clarifying what public authorities need to do, what perhaps individual private institutions' rights are. A lot of them are worried about being sued even when they're doing the right thing. So this is a tidy up of law so that we can create a better space for this conversation.
And here's what the Liberal Democrats' Daisy Cooper had to say.
I do think it is a cynical move in a general election campaign to try and wage another phony culture war. But on the very specific policy, what I would say is that Liberal Democrats have always said that if there is any confusion amongst service providers, then more guidance can be provided.
Joanne Lockwood, the founder of See Change Happen, a firm that gives diversity and inclusion advice to businesses, joins me now. Joanne, what's your reaction to this Tory proposal to change the Equality Act so that that word sex is replaced by the term biological sex to make it clearer?
It's the act of a dying government who have absolutely no hope of getting back in again. They're throwing meat to their grey voters, hoping that it's going to inspire some votes their way. It's going to be unimplementable, whatever they're proposing. I listen to Kemi all day on various chat shows and various interviews, and the objective really is conflating transgender, transsexual people with predatory men. I am not a man. I'm not a predatory man. And she is looking to exclude me and others like me from spaces that we can legitimately occupy using bias and discrimination.
But isn't she concerned that that word sex, just on its own, without biological ahead of it, can be willfully misinterpreted, and that actually women deserve women-only spaces, that that's acceptable? Although you may not agree with this analysis, with the gender-critical view that trans women aren't actually women, they're trans women, so too are women allowed to be protected in their own spaces, so in refuges, in toilets, and anywhere else where we would expect a male-free environment, even if it's males who have undergone some degree of taking puberty blockers or other gender realignment. Effectively, women's only spaces should be for biological women only.
Well, how do we police this term biological? Are we doing inspections? Are we asking people to lift their skirts up and drop their knickers and say, what have you got between your legs? Are we going to judge people, going to take blood tests?
Well, she said, hang on a minute, she said...
what biological means.
She's saying that biological means your biological sex at birth. Surely that's the fairest way to assess it, because members of the transgender community themselves say that they don't want a differentiation between those who have undergone surgery and those who haven't. They're saying if people identify as a woman, they should be regarded as a woman. What she's saying is, no, we have to go back to the fact of the matter. And when it comes to women's only spaces, the only assessment we can ever really make, and the only assessment we can ever use to be fair, is to go back to the beginning, look at a birth certificate and say, in what sex was this person born?
OK, so you're out in public, you're going to a pub, and you want to use the toilet, and there's someone there saying, I'm not sure this person passes my test as being a woman. How do you, yourself, prove you're a woman and able to access these spaces? This is where this term biological sex becomes ludicrous. How do you and other biological women prove that they are biological women? Have you ever taken a chromosome test? Have you ever proved the fact you're a woman? I have a birth certificate. I have a passport. I have a driving license. I've had various operations and surgery. I can prove that I'm a woman. Can you prove you're a woman?
But I don't need to prove I'm a woman because I'm not making... No, but women who haven't undergone any kind of gender realignment or indeed that aren't presenting as transgender women don't need to prove anything because they're not claiming that they want to use other people's spaces. But then how big is this toilet issue to you, Joanne? But Joanne, how big is the toilet issue to you? If there's a disabled toilet...
issue.
What's this need? But what's this need, this kind of, if it's not, because this is the confusion as well. There are some transgender people who said it's not about toilets. Well, why then do you care which toilet you use?
Well, why do you care who's in your toilet then? What's the big deal about toilets? I mean, I spend my life talking about toilets. Why can't we bring the conversation into a different
I tell you why. I tell you why we worry about toilets. We worry about toilets because we worry about our daughters. Because as Kemi Badenoch herself has said, there's been a number of cases in different schools where boys who are identifying as girls have been allowed into the toilets. Toilets are seen by young girls, particularly when they've just started their periods and maybe they're wanting to discuss things with their own girlfriends. That's seen as a kind of, it's a place of sort of solace, privacy and sanctity. Badenoch has made the point that in some schools, because of this idea of letting boys who identify as girls into girls' toilets, it's put girls off from using the toilets, and some girls have ended up with urinary tract infections. That's why it's important.
Oh, I'm not saying that it's not important to some people, and I fully accept that we need to ensure that predatory men, people with nefarious motives, are kept out of spaces that are designed to be safe. I completely support that, but I am not.
Okay.
And people I know are not threats to women, threats to girls. We are not predatory. What Kemi is trying to do is use the trans argument against trans women. What about trans men? If you think about a trans masculine person who's on testosterone, their voice has deepened, they've grown a beard, they've probably lost some hair, they may be bulked up in muscle, and they're forced to use the female toilets. How are you going to feel if a trans man is in the toilet and you won't be able to distinguish whether that man is biologically male or biologically female?
But she's asking for clarity, isn't she? But she's saying if you go back to original birth certificates... No, but Joanne, sorry. If you go back to original birth certificates, you couldn't be clearer. The argument is, even if it's a tiny minority of trans-identifying men who are kind of bending the rules or maybe a threat to women and girls, if there's a tiny threat to women and girls for their safety, that trumps your feelings about using a toilet, because your feelings about using a toilet aren't a matter of life and death, are they?
How often do you carry your birth certificate with you when you're out in public, when you're using the toilet? How often do you prove that you're a woman? We're going to find that people who may be butch lesbians, people who don't conform to the gender norms, trans-masculine people, are going to be policed because of how they look, how they sound. And surely that is one of the fundamentals of the Equality Act, is not to discriminate based on how someone looks or sounds. That sounds like a backward step to me.
OK. Joanne Lockwood, thank you very... No? OK. I mean, it's been a good debate. I hope you'll agree. I appreciate your view. I disagree with your view. But that's what GB News is all about, Joanne. We respectfully disagree. And thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening.
And good luck with your birth certificate and carrying it around with you to prove you're a woman.
OK, well, I won't need to because I'm not transgender. Joanne Lockwood is the fact...
If you don't carry your birth certificate, you won't be able to prove you're a woman.
But I don't need to prove whether I'm a woman or not, because I'm not saying I want to use male-only spaces. This is the difference, Joanne.
No,
we have to leave it there for time reasons.
You're a woman. What if I doubted you're a woman? I want you to prove you're a woman. How does that work? I'm just saying this is the flaw in the argument that Kemi's come up with. Every woman's going to have to prove they're a woman.
It's not, because it's not legitimate to doubt whether actual women are women because they're saying they're women. What we're doubting is whether trans women are women or whether they are men. And I'm arguing that biologically, trans women are men, regardless of what they say. OK. All right, let's leave it there. Thank you. Joanne Lockwood is the founder of See Change Happen, a firm, as I said, that gives diversity and inclusion advice to business. Right, shall we talk about the European situation next? We've got the Labour Party saying that they want closer alignment with Europe, and they want to do that via the medium of a veterinary agreement, which would ease checks on animal and plant products into the EU from the UK. However, lo and behold, the EU has objected to that and said, no, actually, we can't have such an agreement without alignment with the ECJ. That would then put us slightly back to square one, although, to be fair to Labour, they have said that they don't want to rejoin the EU, they don't want to rejoin the single market, and they don't want a customs union, even though the likes of David Lammy, the man hoping to be the next Foreign Secretary, has constantly talked about closer alignment. Let's bring in Mike Galsworthy, the chair of the European Movement UK group, to analyse this. Mike, do we believe Labour when they say that they don't want to do these things? No rejoining, no single market, no customs union, because Sir Keir Starmer, having been an absolutely ardent Remainer for all of his time on the shadow front bench before he became leader, seems to have been very much banging the EU alignment drum.
He wasn't that ardent a Remainer. I mean, you've got
he voted against Brexit multiple times.
Well, he's not as ardent as some of us were, let's put it that way. And also, because he was on the shadow front bench, he was more restricted in what he could say. But what are Labour's plans with regard to Europe? They don't actually have a lot of plans. And of course, I talk to people who are around Labour. Essentially, the situation is this. They didn't think they'd be in this position at the moment where they could actually win a general election just 5 years after. Liz Truss completely gave them a gift at the end of 2022. And so they went into the beginning of 2023 thinking, my God, we could actually be forming a government next year. So, I mean, they have not just, it's not that they've just not talked about Brexit a lot. They've said, okay, red lines because, you know, it's done. We don't want to go backwards right now. But they haven't thought a lot about what they'd actually do with regard to Europe. And particularly because anyone's got a limited amount of bandwidth within which to make plans. And so they focused on lots of domestic issues at home, and they don't have a lot of plans with regard to Europe. They're also, quite spooked by the idea of even trying to open up that conversation during this general election debate. And so both the Tories and the Labour Party are not talking about Brexit for different reasons. However, should Labour get in, then after they've done the first few things that they'd said they would do, there's probably going to be a lot of businesses, a lot of pressure groups, whether it be youth, whether it be whatever sector of society, to say, we need to work better with our neighbourhood. And then it'll be interesting to see how Labour respond to that.
I was going to ask you that, Mike. I mean, are you looking at the prospect of a Labour government as somebody in the pro-European movement and rubbing your hands together with glee, thinking to yourself, right, well, we now restart that campaign. We want to rejoin the EU, so we will exert as much influence as we can on a potential Labour government, and particularly those ministers who we know are secretly on our side, even if for political expediency they don't admit to it?
No, because I don't like lobbying. I mean, essentially, we want to make the argument for rejoining because, look, we've done Brexit. It's an experiment. It's fine to do experiments. I'm a scientist. I like experiments. We've learned what it's like being in. We've learned what it's like being out. We can see what works and what doesn't. And for us, well, for me as a scientist, seeing all the collaboration that you can get, all the freedoms and opportunities that you could get, we want to build the country back closer to Europe and as full members. But lobbying the government isn't enough. If you're trying to make a societal change, it's got to be via the public. It's got to be via all the different regions of our country, all the different demographics, all the different business groups and sectors. So, no, I don't want to. So
what are you saying, Mike? Another referendum?
Oh, I think eventually you'd have to. I mean, I don't think the EU would let us in without another referendum because you'd have to have proof.
I know, but I love this. You've referred to the last referendum as an experiment, but when it's your referendum and it goes in your favour, that's a democratic vote that we have to honour for the rest of our lives, is it?
No. The last vote was a democratic vote. And
okay, so we must honour it.
Campaign, and so the country democratically chose to see what life was like outside the EU. And now the country, driven by the demos, has the kratos, the power, to decide if it wants to stick to Brexit, go to the single market, go back into the EU. It's entitled to do that.
I don't remember during the Brexit campaign.
Have a choice anymore. Is that what you're saying?
I don't remember.
The public have no choice anymore as to what their relationship with Europe should be.
Well, I just don't remember at any point during the Brexit campaign when we were told this was a once-in-a-lifetime referendum, that it was actually just an experiment, and after a few years we would do another vote to see whether we agreed with the first verdict. I don't remember being told that. I don't think anyone listening or watching this remembers that moment either, Mike. Very briefly, though, because we've got to leave it here.
But it's the same right throughout history. You can vote for different governments. We went into the EU, we came out, we can go back if we like. I mean, it's for the public to choose. Are you saying the public can no longer choose because this is your preference? Anyway, it would be in the hands of the next government to actually listen to the public, see what the public want. You can't tell the youth for the rest of their existence that they've got no say if they want to regain free movement or regain Erasmus. It's like, no, that decision was taken for you like decades ago, and it was said at the time this is a once in a generation thing, and we will decide when that generation is over. No, it's all these things are rolling issues.
All right, Mike Galsworthy, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. Last time I checked, I mean, young people were able to vote for Brexit at 18, and old people were able to vote for it. So those 18-year-olds just understand that their lifetime is spent out of the EU because that's what they voted for. Last time I checked. Anyway, in light of Matt Goodwin talking about this idea of nobody knowing what D-Day means, or at least half the public not knowing what it means, we are, of course, going to get a dispatch from a GB News reporter on Omaha Beach as the world prepares to mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Stay tuned for that.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you.
That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice.
Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The Princess of Wales has said she's excited by a new report on prioritising early childhood, a cause, as we know, that she's closely associated with.
Yes, the task force findings claim that the UK could reap £45.5 billion in economic benefits if firms prioritise early childhood.
Well, let's talk about this now with our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Good morning, Cameron.
Good morning.
I suppose it's characteristically Catherine, isn't it, to say she doesn't want to distract from this report by sort of people talking about her health. But we should start probably by saying she said she's not feeling well enough to come and talk about this in public, but sort of saying she's watching it, keeping a close eye from behind closed doors.
Yeah, absolutely. This should not be seen as a return to work by the Princess of Wales, but I have been told she's A, read the report and B, been briefed on it. But this all stems really from her work when she started being a working member of the royal family, where she was working closely with people suffering from addiction, mental health problems. And what she found is all of these issues tend to stem from a poor start in life, so the first 5 years of a child's life. So in January 2023, she set up Shaping Us, this awareness campaign for the early years. 2 months later, she convened the business task force, so 8 members of big businesses across the UK, and over a generation, that could add, as they claim, more than £40 billion to the UK economy each year. We spoke to Peter Grigg yesterday. He's the chair of Home Starts UK, a charity which supports young families. Let's hear what he said about the Princess's role in this.
She's been a real driving force behind the report and everything it's done. And when we've spent time with the Royal Foundation, what it does, it reminds everyone that this is really important work and early childhood matters, that more businesses should get involved, that more charities are out there for people who want to do more to support families and children. So it's been a wonderful experience.
The People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, with the 80th anniversary of D-Day fast approaching, let's cross over to Normandy, where our reporter Sophie Reaper is there as preparations get way for Thursday's commemorations. Sophie.
Good evening to you, Camilla. Well, we're joining you this evening from Port en Bessin, which was the official link-up point for the British and American forces on the Normandy landing. Some of the British were landing on my left on Gold Beach. Some of the Americans were landing on my right on Omaha Beach. And this is the point where they came together and they fought together. They went house to house trying to take this town back from Nazis. And that is exactly what they did. So in the next few days, there's going to be a parade through Port en Bessin. The Marines are here over my right shoulder. They're here for that. And it's just all over this part of France over the coming days. We've been in Bayeux this morning, an absolutely incredible atmosphere as people, not just from the UK, not just from America, not just from Canada, but from all over the world, will be coming together across the Normandy coastline over the coming days to not only show their respect for those who gave their lives or almost sacrificed their lives on D-Day, not only to show them respect, but also to celebrate what they did, what they achieved, giving us the freedom that we have today. We're expecting an incredible amount of people, as well as some veterans, to join us over the coming days. So we'll be live here in Normandy as we approach that 80th anniversary, an incredibly momentous day, not only for Britain, but for the world.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Sophie. And of course, GB News will be bringing you all of the latest from those commemorations in full because it's such an important anniversary. Tom Harwood, another busy man today, joins me in the studio. Tom, what have you got coming up on State of the Nation?
Goodness me, I'm going to be talking to the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps. Now, of course, the race has been blown wide open today. Perhaps not the race for number 10, but the race for second place. Because there are all of these different polls that suggest, could it be nip and tuck for the Tories and the Lib Dems in terms of who's the official opposition? Well, that's just been completely blown open by a new leader of Reform UK and Nigel Farage's candidacy in Clacton. Could he do what he hasn't done 7 times before and finally be elected an MP? One poll suggests he could, but lots of questions to ask the Defence Secretary and many, many more guests beside.
Very good too. Looking forward to listening to Shapps and see what he's got to say. Tom is up next. I'm going to be back tomorrow at 7 with Vote 2024, the new name for this show until the election. But first, here's the weather with Alex Burkill.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Whilst it is going to stay dry for many of us as we go through the rest of today, we can expect some wet weather pushing its way in as we go into tomorrow. That's in association with a feature currently out in the Atlantic and it's heading its way towards the UK. For the time being, though, we are going to have a lot of dry weather as we go through the rest of this evening and overnight. Some places will see some clear skies developing, but many areas sticking with largely cloudy skies. And then rain pushing its way in initially across parts of Northern Ireland, but reaching far western parts of Scotland, England and Wales later on. Because of the largely cloudy skies, temperatures not dropping a huge amount, but some places under the clear skies could just about drop into single figures. If we take a closer look at what will be happening first thing tomorrow morning, and it's a generally fine picture across many southern southeastern parts. Yes, a bit of cloud across East Anglia, but on the whole a dry story here. Different picture further north and west though. Rain across Northern Ireland, northwest England, parts of Wales, and also a large chunk chunk of Scotland as well, waking up to a pretty wet start as that wet weather pushes its way in. Eastern Scotland may be clinging on to some fine weather for a little bit longer, but across far northern parts of Scotland, here there will be some hefty showers around, and some of these could turn pretty heavy, possibly even thundery as we go through the day. The rain is gradually going to make its way southeastwards, but southeastern parts of the country likely to stay pretty dry by the time the system arrives here. It will have broken up so much that I'm only expecting 1 or 2 spots of rain, if anything. And in the southeast, temperatures still on the warm side, highs of around 22, 23 Celsius, but something markedly fresher towards the northwest behind the front. As we look into Wednesday, it is going to be a showery day, particularly towards the north and west. That's where the showers are coming from. Some of them could be heavy, possibly even thundery, maybe even a little bit of snow over the highest ground of Scotland. But further south, it's looking drier and brighter. A similar picture on Thursday, but I think by Friday, the showers are going to be a bit more widespread. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the Great British Summer Giveaway, and have we got a prize for you? There's a totally tax-free £15,000 in cash to make your summer spectacular. Spend that extra cash however you like. You'll also win a brand new iPhone, Apple AirPods, and if that wasn't enough, a £500 voucher to spend at your favourite UK attraction, so you can enjoy amazing days out this year. For a chance to win the iPhone, treats, and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but actually, it's about you.
And we won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear
all sides
as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Tom Harwood, Deputy Political Editor of GB News, bringing you the State of the Nation's 2024 election coverage. Tonight, Nigel Farage has announced he's standing as a candidate for the Reform Party and becoming the party's leader.
I've changed my mind.